Mandatory minicamp starts Tuesday. 3 days, full equipment, starting caliber defensive personnel on the field, and for the first time this entire offseason, the Cleveland Browns quarterback competition is going to be evaluated under conditions that will actually produce real, meaningful, unambiguous information. The voluntary portion is done. The spring workouts in helmets and shorts, the controlled environments, the natural ceiling on competitive intensity that comes with non-mandatory practice, all of that is behind us now. What happens in Berea this week carries a different weight entirely, and I think anyone who has been watching this situation develop through the spring understands exactly why. Shedeur Sanders is in that building. Jared Verse is suiting up on defense. The 2026 starting secondary is reporting. And the question that has been hovering over this franchise since Deshaun Watson's injury cracked the door open last season is about to have real pressure applied to it in a way that no amount of spring optimism can substitute for. I've been tracking this competition closely, and I want to walk through everything: what the OTA period genuinely revealed, what it still left unresolved, and why these specific 3 days have the potential to start settling a conversation that Cleveland cannot afford to leave open much longer. But before any of that, I need to address something directly, because there's a narrative circulating in Cleveland media right now that I think needs to be dealt with honestly before it gets any more oxygen than it's already received. Brendan Sorsby has been medically cleared to play football in 2026. And the moment that information came out, certain corners of the Browns media landscape treated it like a signal flare. Like suddenly Cleveland had a wild card option sitting out there that deserved serious consideration, like Sorsby's availability somehow reshapes what this quarterback room should be doing. Tony Grossi and others in that space started floating his name with a weight that I genuinely don't think the situation warrants, and I want to be clear about why that conversation needs to stop, because I don't think the people pushing it are engaging honestly with what Todd Monken has already said publicly. Monken closed this door. He didn't leave wiggle room. He said it isn't on his radar. He said he doesn't believe this franchise is in a position to go down that road. He used the phrase slippery slope, and crucially, he said all of that without even needing to fully engage the football talent question, which is itself a complicated and contested conversation. He looked at the complete picture surrounding Sorsby, the gambling addiction, the documented rehabilitation process, the legal situation involving a $5 million dispute with Texas Tech, the fact that the supplemental draft is the only professional pathway remaining. And he said, directly and without diplomatic softening, "I am not bringing that into my quarterback room." That is a head coach drawing a clean line. The analysts who have looked at this clearly have said the same thing. Too much institutional weight, too much risk to a room that is finally pointed in a productive direction. Not nearly enough justification given what Cleveland actually has inside that building already. I understand why the impulse exists. Rebuilding franchises sometimes make desperate swings at quarterback because the psychological discomfort of sitting with uncertainty at that position can override rational evaluation. Cleveland has its own painful history with exactly that failure mode. Decisions made not because they reflected sound football logic, but because the front office couldn't tolerate the weight of not having a clear answer. But here's what that framing gets completely wrong about the current situation. This is not a desperate quarterback room. This is not a franchise staring at a depth chart with nothing workable. There is a real competition happening in Berea right now between a veteran who is reportedly physically healthy and motivated and a developing rookie who has been making a first-year head coach struggle to stay professionally measured when describing what he's watching. That is not desperation. That is a process. Injecting Sorsby into that process would be one of the most self-destructive organizational decisions Cleveland could make at this exact moment. The door is closed. Moving on. Now let's talk about the competition that actually matters, because the OTA period gave us genuine information, and it's worth being honest about both what it showed and what it didn't fully resolve. What we've consistently seen from Shedeur Sanders through the spring is documented, credible improvement. This isn't narrative being constructed by fans who are already committed to a conclusion. This is coming from multiple independent reporters with direct access to the practice field. The processing speed has improved. The ball is releasing more quickly. Route combinations are registering in his reads at a rate that wasn't consistently present earlier in the offseason. He's getting real competitive reps now, meaningful reps against actual defensive personnel, which is a completely different operational reality from last season when he was essentially functioning as a highly invested observer in his own quarterback room while the organization protected prior decisions it wasn't ready to abandon. Todd Monken spoke about this progress, and the language he reached for is still worth examining. He said Sanders had come miles from where he was during voluntary minicamp back in April. Miles. Not steps, not solid improvement. Miles. I want you to think about why that specific word matters, coming from a first-year head coach who understands completely that every public statement he makes about his quarterback competition gets dissected. Coaches at that level do not accidentally deploy that kind of language. Miles is a word that escapes when what you're watching on the field is outrunning your projections, and your professional restraint can only hold so much back before something honest slips through. That word was not managed. That word was genuine. But I want to be straight with you about the full picture, because the honest version of this conversation includes things that don't fit cleanly into an ascending narrative. Sanders has been inconsistent through the OTA period, not in a way that should generate alarm, but inconsistently enough that anyone watching carefully has noticed the variance. There have been practices where everything looked clean. The timing was sharp, the decisions came fast, the ball arrived with the velocity and placement you want to see from a quarterback commanding an NFL offense. And then there have been sessions where something stalled. A hesitation in the decision chain at exactly the wrong moment. A rep where you could see the full weight of what he was holding, the scheme, the pressure of the competition, the significance of every snap, settling on him just a beat too long before the ball came out. That back and forth is precisely what Monken has been signaling when he talks about his evaluation shifting from day to day. One practice, Sanders looks like the clearest answer in the room. The next session, Watson has a strong showing, the picture blurs, and nobody has produced enough consecutive quality reps to make the decision feel obvious rather than arbitrarily applied. One day I lean this way, the next I lean the other. That is a coach describing exactly what he's watching. And the fact that he's still describing it that way this late in the spring is the most honest indicator of where this competition actually stands heading into mandatory minicamp. What changes fundamentally this week is the defensive quality that both quarterbacks are processing against. That's the variable that makes these 3 days structurally different from everything that came before. Through the voluntary portion, there's a built-in ceiling on competitive intensity. Scheme is simplified in certain respects. The secondary isn't executing every coverage concept at full game preparation intensity. Defensive pressure is naturally moderated by the non-contact environment. None of that applies anymore. Denzel Ward is reporting. Jared Verse is in pads. The players who will be lining up across from opposing quarterbacks in September are now lining up across from Sanders and Watson in Berea. When Shedeur drops back this week, the coverages coming at him are being designed by coaches who have spent the entire spring studying his tendencies, identifying where his processing creates hesitation, and constructing defensive looks specifically intended to manufacture doubt in his decision-making at critical moments. That is not the same test as OTA 7-on-7. That is a materially, significantly harder test, and what a quarterback does when the margin for error compresses, when the clean answer isn't sitting right there but has to be manufactured quickly under real defensive resistance. That's the information that separates players at this level in ways that controlled spring environments simply cannot produce. Something an analyst tracking this competition said recently has stayed with me, and I think it's the most precise framing available for what Cleveland needs out of this week. The idea is essentially this: if you truly have 2 starting caliber quarterbacks competing at equal levels, you effectively have no starting quarterback at all. What that means in practical terms is that 2 players trading good days and bad days is not the same thing as a real competition with genuine momentum building toward an answer. A legitimate quarterback battle has one player applying consistent enough pressure that the coaching staff's hand starts to feel forced, not choosing arbitrarily between two similar performers, but responding to one player making the inevitable feel obvious. What Cleveland has had through the voluntary portion of this offseason is two quarterbacks being inconsistently productive during the stretch of the calendar that should be the least demanding. No contact, controlled environments, familiar personnel, no defensive game planning designed to crack them specifically. If neither player has found consistent command during the low-difficulty portion of this process, the question worth asking seriously is what that projects forward to as the physical intensity and scheme complexity increase. That is the specific pressure these 3 days are designed to apply, and Monken has been unusually transparent about what he's looking for, which is itself notable because first-year head coaches typically maintain maximum ambiguity about their evaluation processes for as long as possible. He has communicated, in language more direct than he probably intended in certain moments, that he wants someone to take this job. He doesn't want to drag a live quarterback controversy into training camp. He doesn't want the distraction eroding a development calendar that a young team building towards something real cannot afford to waste. He wants one of these quarterbacks to make the decision feel inevitable through consecutive performance rather than forcing him to manufacture clarity from ambiguous information. This minicamp, full equipment, full defensive staffing, mandatory attendance, is the most direct opportunity available for that to happen before the padded training camp sessions begin in earnest. Now let me tell you honestly where I stand, because I think you deserve a direct position rather than a both sides presentation that leaves you nowhere. I have believed all offseason that Shedeur Sanders is going to be the starting quarterback for the 2026 Cleveland Browns, and nothing I've watched through the spring has given me a reason to move off that. The development is real. The pace of it is real. The fact that a first-year head coach who has everything professionally at stake in this quarterback decision still cannot discuss Sanders without his honest assessment breaking through the carefully managed language. That is real in a way that practiced neutrality can't fully conceal. He is not the same player who operated from the margins of a mismanaged roster last season. He's in a completely different environment now. Genuine coaching investment, genuine preparation, genuine competitive reps. And the results are reflecting all of that in ways that are increasingly difficult to dismiss, even for someone trying to stay neutral. But I'm not going to pretend Deshaun Watson is irrelevant to this, because that would be dishonest, and it would also be wrong. The reports indicating he looks physically healthy this spring are not trivial information. There is a real and meaningful difference between a Watson who is grinding through physical limitations and a Watson whose body is actually functioning the way it was built to function. The latter version, healthy, sharpened by competitive urgency, fully aware that losing this job to a younger player would define how his career in Cleveland ends, brings genuine things to this competition. Experience in situations that create psychological pressure on younger players. Professional craft accumulated over years of navigating complex defensive schemes, and a competitive drive that does not quietly accept being outperformed in front of coaches he's trying to convince. That version of Watson is a real factor, and anyone who isn't accounting for it seriously isn't reading this clearly, which is exactly what makes Tuesday through Thursday feel genuinely significant rather than procedurally significant. Both quarterbacks understand with complete clarity what is being evaluated this week. Neither one can approach these 3 days as a continuation of the spring routine, as an environment where good days and bad days average out over time, and the cumulative picture is what gets assessed. Monken has essentially told the room that he is looking for someone to establish something definitive over consecutive practice sessions, to produce a level of consistent performance that gives him real information rather than forcing him to construct a decision from ambiguity. The defensive personnel arriving at full competitive strength this week means the information produced will finally be unambiguous in a way the OTA period never fully delivered. There's one more dimension I want to name directly because I think it gets absorbed into the tactical noise around the competition and deserves its own acknowledgement. Shedeur Sanders has been pointed at this moment since the day Cleveland selected him. Last season, he existed in a quarterback room where every organizational decision surrounding him was being filtered through the accumulated weight of prior commitments that had nothing to do with honest talent evaluation. He prepared anyway. He absorbed a system from a secondary role, invested fully in a situation that was smaller than what his ability warranted, and did it without making the frustration visible in ways that would have been completely understandable given the circumstances. He waited, not passively, not with resignation, but with the specific discipline that comes from understanding that the moment you stop preparing for an opportunity you haven't received yet is the moment you guarantee you won't be ready when it finally arrives. And now here he is, mandatory minicamp. Number 8. Full defensive personnel. Real consequences attached to every single rep. That's not a sentimental argument. The NFL does not reward patience with starting jobs. The field is the only judge that matters, and it does not care about anyone's journey. What I'm making is a football argument grounded in what the development arc looks like from the outside, what the coaching staff's language is communicating beneath the professional restraint, and what the organizational investment in his preparation is signaling about the direction this is headed. All of it points the same way. This week is where that direction either begins to crystallize into something that feels settled or extends into the messier, longer storyline of a full training camp battle that nobody inside that building, not Monken, not the front office, not the players, not the fan base, actually wants to be managing when there's a full season to prepare for. 3 days. Starting caliber defense. Full equipment. No more voluntary cushion. No more controlled ceilings. No more spring asterisks, reminding everyone that none of it was fully real yet. It is real now. Tuesday through Thursday in Berea, the competition that has been building all spring is finally going to be stress tested in a way that produces the kind of information coaching staffs actually use to make irreversible decisions. Whatever comes out of those 3 days is going to shape this quarterback conversation in ways that are very hard to walk back once they're established. I know where I think this ends. I've known for a while. But knowing it and watching it actually become real in front of you are two genuinely different experiences, and this week is where those two things begin to converge into the same one.